Hey y'all, this is Darren Van Dam, and you are watching Flick Connection, the show that connects you with the best movies to stream. And today we're going to be talking about all of the best stuff that Netflix has added in the past 6 months or so. So in this video, we're going to be talking about all of the new release items on Netflix that I particularly enjoyed. Most, if not all of these, are Netflix originals. And they're mostly movies, but I do have a couple of other things on here as well that I found particularly interesting over recent months. This video is sponsored by Raycon, and I'll be telling you more about them later in the video, but right now we're going to talk about a popular series that I was confused by, and I'm still not quite sure how I feel about, which is why it's at the back of the list, The Watcher.
I don't know many people with a dumbwaiter, but I don't know anybody who'd be okay with some stranger breaking into the house and writing on it.
That's what's wrong with the world these days, you know? The word neighbor just doesn't mean what it used to.
So season 1 of The Watcher just released recently in October, and it was a fairly popular show. I'll be surprised if they don't bring it back next year. And it was a good Halloween watch. However, the reason I'm not sure how I feel about it is because I did feel like it promised a lot more than it delivered. They set quite a bit of stuff up and never quite brought it home. So by the end, I wasn't really fulfilled with this one, which is why it's at the back, but it did have a lot of really interesting moments that I found way more dynamic and interesting than anything that I've seen on regular TV in quite a while. So it's got a little bit of a David Lynch thing going on, not quite as weird, a little more accessible, but if you're into that kind of stuff, at least give the first 2 episodes a try. Luckiest Girl Alive is a new release movie starring Mila Kunis. It's based on a best-selling novel, and this is another one I was a little lukewarm on by the end, but Luckiest Girl Alive does have a bunch of fantastic moments in it. Now, while some of the moments are particularly fantastic, the movie does depict sexual assault multiple ways from multiple different points of view, and it is quite upsetting the way that it was filmed in this movie. But it's very important because that's what all of the events of this movie revolve around. I will say I thought this had an interesting voice. Mila Kunis is exceptional in this. I've never seen her do anything quite this good. Ultimately, I felt like there were quite a few things that were just too convenient for me by the end of this movie, and it kind of felt a little bit less impactful as a result. That said, though, there were some stunning moments in this movie. My next pick is one of, if not the newest movie on this particular list, and it's one of only 2 family-friendly picks on this particular list, My Father's Dragon. Now, this is from the same animation team that did beautiful movies like The Secret of Kells, Wolfwalkers, and The Breadwinner, all award-winning animated movies. And out of all of those, I actually felt like My Father's Dragon was my least favorite. It is beautifully animated, there's some very interesting storytelling elements here, and the story itself is very different from anything I've seen, so big points on all those fronts. Yet I do feel like the other movies they've produced have been folksier, have had better stories, and have ultimately been a better finished product than My Father's Dragon. That said, though, this is one of the more interesting family-friendly movies on the platform right now. I'll also say if you did like it, definitely go check out those other movies I mentioned. They are amazing. My next pick is a grim true crime movie with some heavy-hitting stars in it, like Jessica Chastain and Eddie Redmayne in The Good Nurse. Now, this is based on the true story of a nurse who was killing patients. Potentially too many patients to count. Jessica Chastain plays a good nurse who helps bring this character to justice, but this is a fairly slow-paced movie, and it really hinges on their performances. They both do a killer job in this movie. It's really no surprise, and they both have a couple of dynamite scenes in the movie. So if you're fans of either one of those actors, you definitely have to check out this movie. I would also say, I would imagine that this movie will widely appeal to nurses and people in the healthcare industry because it is a lot of inside baseball in this movie. So if you work in a hospital or any other kind of care facility in any capacity, I think you'll find a lot of things interesting with this particular movie, even if it is very, very grim. Okay, my next pick is a gangster movie from Poland that I absolutely loved. It, too, is a Netflix original titled FURIOZA. As I said, this is about gangs in Poland, yet there's an undercover cop element here, and it's ultimately a pretty brutal movie as well. There are several brawls in this movie that are pretty visceral, I have talked about this on the channel before, and I've compared it to Point Break, which is a little bit of a stretch. They're not doing any sort of extreme sports in this, and it doesn't even have the same flavor as Point Break, but the way that you follow the infiltration and this gang, they feel very much like the gang in Point Break. Yet Furioza does feel more visceral and realistic. It's also got a gangster epic element. It's a little bit loose. It's not tied together perfectly, which I think prevents it from just being a like slam dunk of a gangster movie, but still, for a Netflix original from Poland that you've probably never seen, this is an excellent flick. All right, now we're moving on to one of the more fun movies on this list. It too came out around Halloween and was a fantastic Halloween watch because it is a shoot 'em up with some wild vampire action in Day Shift.
I mean, everybody pisses himself the first time.
Really?
Yeah.
Did you?
No, I didn't. But listen, you did.
Now, this is a silly shoot 'em up kind of a movie. But if you've been watching the channel for a long time, you know that that is my jam. Jamie Foxx plays a vampire exterminator in this movie, and it has some wild action sequences in it. Keep in mind, this is a low-budget vampire comedy where Snoop Dogg wears a cowboy hat and shoots a minigun. It's that type of movie. If that sounds like you, though, Day Shift knocks it out of the park. And this is actually the first feature film directed by J.J. Perry, who is a longtime stuntman, famous for movies like John Wick, Warrior, and some of the Fast and Furious movies. He is behind the camera on this one, and it does feature some wild stunts, especially for a Netflix original vampire flick. And not only is it definitely the type of movie to have a sequel, it was successful on Netflix. I will be surprised if we don't see a Night Shift movie sometime in the next year or two. My next pick is a sequel to one of my favorite Netflix original action movies of 2020, Lost Bullet 2. Now, I highly recommend checking out Lost Bullet if you haven't seen it. You do need to see the first one in order to know what's happening in the second, because Lost Bullet 2 is a continuation of the story. In fact, it picks up right where Lost Bullet left off. And the story is important for these, but these are stunt-heavy movies, and not only are they stunt-heavy movies, but it's a lot of real car stunts. You know, old-fashioned, real gasoline, explosions, debris flying everywhere. None of this CGI cartoon crap. This is real stuff, and this is filmed very much like old-fashioned stunt movies. The main character in these movies is a stuntman. He's actually driving the car. He's actually doing the fights. Now, I was not blown away by Lost Bullet 2, which is why it's further back on the list, but it's one of those sequels that I felt was every bit as good as the original. It just didn't really do anything too new or elevate things too much. In fact, their new gimmick with the electricity on the spikes in front of the car, it ends up not being as silly as I thought it was going to be based on the trailers, and it leads to some spectacular moments that, again, are all happening in camera, and again, it's just wild stuff. If you like vintage action movies, Charles Bronson type of stuff, trust me, you're going to love the Lost Bullet series. Now, before moving on with the rest of this list, I want to tell you about today's sponsor, Raycon. So here are my everyday earbuds, and I absolutely love these things. And Raycons make a fantastic gift this holiday season because most people could use a good pair of earbuds. They're great for working out, they're great for taking calls, you name it. Odds are you know somebody who would love a pair of Raycons. Raycons are also super comfortable, they pop right in, and they do not pop out no matter what you get up to. And my Raycons not only sound fantastic, but they come with a bunch of premium features, including different sound modes like pure, balanced, and a bass boosted mode, as well as noise reduction and my favorite feature, awareness mode, which is great for jogging or listening to music while you're raising kids because you can hear what's going on around you and the music sounds great. And you can find Raycons in big box stores like Walmart and Kohl's, but I'll tell you right now, you can save 20% when you use my link in the description below or just type in buy Raycon, that's BUYRAYCON.com/flickconnection, and type in the early Black Friday code EARLYBF. Again, you're gonna save 20% site-wide or up to 30% if you buy one of their holiday bundles. They have several different holiday bundles, but my favorite is the Everyday Duo. The Everyday earbuds are fantastic for everyday use, and you get 2 pair with 30% off, which means you knock out 2 gifts on your list. But the main reason I like them so much is they offer the same premium sound you get from other brands at literally half the price, and that's before the discounts come in. So if you want to get that discount, again, go to the link in the video description below. You're going to save 20% or even up to 30% if you go with those holiday bundles. It's a fantastic deal. But speaking of fantastic stuff, let's talk about the rest of the movies on this list. All right, my next 2 picks on this list are, again, both Netflix originals, and they're both historical dramas. The first one being from South Africa, the Silverton Siege. Now, this is loosely based on a true story of a siege that took place at a bank in Pretoria, South Africa. One of the demands of the hostage takers was the freeing of Nelson Mandela, so obviously this is when he was still behind bars. And this is a fantastic period piece. It's really well produced. There are multiple shootouts that feel very real. Again, all the production elements are top notch with this movie. It's a really great hostage negotiation style film. It's got a killer soundtrack. In fact, the only downside to it is that they fudged a lot of the real facts. For instance, one of the main characters is a woman in the movie. There were no female hostage takers in the actual event. Also, they make a big point about them not really asking for money and only really being interested in the Nelson Mandela freeing. So I read up on it after watching the movie because I did like it so much, and that was sort of fudged as well. Like, I mean, yes, they did ask for him to be freed, but they asked for a ton of other stuff, and that seemed like it was just to keep the police off. So this is kind of a made-up story, made to seem more politically impactful than it maybe actually was at the time. But if you take it with a grain of salt, again, this is a top-notch hostage flick. Now, potentially the weirdest and maybe even most off-putting movie on this list is actually the new Marilyn Monroe movie, Blonde. Now, this is from writer-director Andrew Dominik, who's most famous for movies like Killing Them Softly and the assassination of Jesse James by the coward Robert Ford. So, he's an incredible filmmaker, and there are tons of amazing moments in Blonde. However, the way this is structured is less of a plot-driven narrative and more of an experience or sort of snapshot or collection of snapshots of her life. You switch back and forth between black and white and color. You go through different phases of her life. Sometimes you just pop into them with no real awareness of what's going on because those are things that were happening to her. So whether or not this accurately depicts her life, I'll never know, but it does feel very raw, very real, and has a lot of emotion every single scene, even though, again, there's really no plot driving this thing forward. It is worth noting this is rated NC-17. It does feature some graphic sexual elements. It's also 3 hours long, so it is kind of exhausting, which is why it's not ranked really high. But again, if you're a movie buff, even if you have zero interest in the Marilyn Monroe story at this point, you've got to see this movie just to see what Andrew Dominik did with it. But let's jump from that NC-17 movie to the other family-friendly one on this list, The Sea Beast. So not only do I love the giant sea monsters and the adventure story in this movie, but the animation style is absolutely beautiful. This looks like it easily could have been released from Pixar. In fact, had this come out in theaters, I think it would have been successful. This would have been a fun trip to the movies with my family. As it stands though, we watched it at home a couple of times, and while my kids really did like it, I think I enjoyed it more than they did. Again, I absolutely loved all the giant monsters in this movie. There are several action sequences in the movie that are all put together really well. There's a lot of funny elements that happen in them. Reminded me a little bit of Wallace and Gromit action sequences, which again, as far as animated movies go, those are always top-notch. But if you want just full throttle action on Netflix right now, I highly recommend checking out the Netflix original from South Korea titled Carter. Now, this is a 2-hour all-out action movie where the action rarely, and I mean rarely, takes a lull. This is also filmed as if it's one continuous shot. Now, I've seen quite a few movies done that way, some done almost perfectly. Carter is a little bit sloppy. This is a little bit more of a punk rock, hard-hitting type of a movie, meaning you can tell when they're switching shots, but it doesn't really matter because the action is so wild in this one. Even when the effects don't quite look right or don't look convincing, they're happening amid the chaos of some wild John Woo-style action sequences. I've recommended Hardcore Henry multiple times on this channel. It's one of my favorite all-out action movies to recommend on Netflix. Carter is almost as good. In fact, I would say it's got even more action packed into it. I mean, it's longer and there's less dialogue. In fact, there's so little dialogue in this movie. It's actually impressive that they pulled off a story amid all of this chaos as well. If I've piqued your interest at all with Carter, I'm telling you, this one is a wild one. Okay, my next two picks are not movies, and my next one is maybe the oldest thing on this particular list, but it is Volume 3 of Love, Death, and Robots, one of my favorite little Netflix exclusive series. If you have not discovered these yet, they are collections of sci-fi short films. Some of them actually have quite a bit of sexual themes in them as well, but not all of them. And the newest collection, Volume 3, I think is my favorite. There was maybe only one in the entire series I was not a fan of. Each one has its own stunning, beautiful style, and I also find that the ones that have less of a story tend to be short and sweet, meaning I'm kind of done with them by the time they wrap up, but then some of the more epic ones, I'm a little bit disappointed when they end. I want to see more of it, yet they only exist as these little shorts, and none of them are connected, so you could just pick up watching them wherever. But if you want to start with my personal favorites from the newest volume, I really enjoyed Bad Traveling. That one was one of the more epic ones. Night of the Many Dead is a really fun watch, and it's short and sweet. And then Hiburo easily had some of the most beautiful and interesting animation out of the entire series so far. Now, on a very similar note, one of my favorite things that they just added in October was Guillermo del Toro's Cabinet of Curiosities. I loved almost every single hour-long short horror film in this series. These were sort of like a modern-day Twilight Zone or Tales from the Crypt mixed with H.P. Lovecraft, because we all know Guillermo del Toro loves his H.P. Lovecraft. In fact, he is probably the creator that brings Lovecraft things to life in the best way. And this series really blew my hair back. I was actually surprised at how good the productions were on these. Again, I think all of these are fantastic. They're all about 1 hour long. They're not connected in any way, but my favorites included The Viewing, which was actually directed by the director of Mandy, Panos Cosmatos. This one's a little bit slow. It takes a while getting in, but I like all of the actors. You've got some great comedy actors here, and a stellar performance from Peter Weller, who is one of the more legendary sci-fi horror actors in existence. So it's really cool to see him in this. And then by the time you get towards the end, this thing really pops off in a wild way. If you're a fan of Panos Cosmatos, you have to see this episode. If you have not liked Beyond the Black Rainbow or Mandy, this one might not connect with you either. I also really enjoyed Graveyard Rats. This one took about 15-20 minutes to really get started, but once you end up in the rat tunnels, I loved everything this one did. This felt like a Guillermo del Toro movie mixed with like Edgar Allan Poe, and again, the production level here is just top notch with practical effects and the whole thing. And then I also liked The Outside, which is easily the weirdest one in the whole bunch. This is directed by Anna Lily Amanpour, who did The Bad Batch and A Girl Walks Home Alone at Midnight. This one reminded me a little bit of the 80s movie The Stuff. It had some nice comedy elements in there as well. This is a good watch if you like really weird 80s horror movies. You're gonna dig this one as well. And again, the rest are really fantastic, but those three stood out to me. Now remember I mentioned that single take trick was a little sloppy with Carter, but that movies do this really well. My next pick is a great example, if not one of the best I've ever seen. It also was just recently added to Netflix. It comes from France. It's titled Athena. Now, they do have a subtitled version and a dubbed version of this movie. I can attest the dubbed version is quite good if you don't like reading subtitles. This is about a riot in a city in France. And the word riot doesn't quite capture it. This is this major, almost tipping point of a revolution that's happening in these, I won't call them housing projects, but low-income housing. And there's an army that gets formed and everything feels incredibly realistic. It's violent, but also stunningly beautiful at times. As I said, this is filmed as if it is one long take, and you can tell there are multiple sequences in this that are a marvel to watch. As soon as the camera starts rolling, this feels like it's one continuous shot with lots of action. Now, they do this in a way where they string them together. You can barely tell with Athena, and that's even if you're really looking for it closely. This is an incredibly well-crafted movie, and while the movie does have some brutal moments, it's not overly violent to the point that it should really repulse and turn people off. It's not that type of a film, but again, if you want to see a stunning movie that just recently got added to Netflix, this is one of the best. I'm almost wondering why I don't have it ranked higher. It's that good. Okay, my next recommendation was polarizing, and I want you to listen to me closely because even though I have it ranked high, I do not recommend this for everyone watching this video. The new series Dahmer, I thought, was top-notch stuff for multiple reasons, which I'll explain, but it is such a dark way to spend 10 hours. That's how long this show is. It really is difficult to stay in that mode for that period of time. I felt like the show was almost every bit as dark as David Fincher's Seven, especially the first episode, but all of the performances are incredible. The production really tried to capture a lot of details of the Jeffrey Dahmer case, and again, a fairly accurate way. They try to match costumes, they try to make his apartment look the way it looked. There's a killer 80s soundtrack in this thing as well, but I'm gonna warn you again, it is difficult to stay in this dark mode for that long to watch the entire series, so tread lightly with this one. However, if you generally like true crime content, whether it be documentaries or things like this, Dahmer is one of the best I've ever seen. I feel like they did lean into some themes a little bit hard, but for the most part, they play this fairly straight and really just present how terrifying of a scenario this was. Not just Dahmer's actions, but the actions of the police, the actions of the media, the actions of people in his orbit. All of it is incredibly disturbing, so if that's not for you, don't watch Dahmer. Okay, my next pick is, I think, technically a remake of a movie from the 1930s, a classic war movie, but it's so different that it basically just borrows the name from the original movie and book, All Quiet on the Western Front. I say it borrowed the title, it's also the same basic concept. You follow a young German soldier who's very enthusiastic to join World War I, and when he's literally in the trenches, he learns the true horrors of war, and this movie puts them on full display. This is a German language movie, but it does have a decent dubbed version as well. This movie features an incredible depiction of trench warfare, much more than I've seen in almost any other movie. It's incredibly violent at times, but that's kind of the point of the story. I was honestly surprised at how good of a Netflix original this movie was. This reminded me a lot of 1917, which is a stellar World War I movie. And really, had this not been a Netflix original, had I gone to the theater to see this, I would not have been disappointed. This is an excellent war movie, easily one of the best I've seen in years. Now, after all that gushing on my number 2 pick, my number 1 might be my favorite Netflix original movie I've ever seen, which is a bold statement because I watch almost all of them. Now, this too is not for everybody. In fact, it's incredibly slow paced, but it was so well put together. I did not mind. I was on the edge of my seat the entire time watching The Stranger. Now, this too is based on a true story and it features a lot of changes. Names, dates, locations, all changed. You can look up the real case like I did after the movie, but it's best to know very little going into this movie. This too is about an undercover operation to capture a criminal. I don't want to say anything about what the criminal did because The Stranger does such an amazing job of giving you all this information very slowly, and it builds the story in a way that I was honestly blown away by. The Stranger has an incredible mood, amazing performances from both Joel Edgerton and Sean Harris. And I will say, knowing that this really did happen, even though a lot of the key information has been changed, elevates this movie. It makes it feel incredibly tense, and I absolutely loved it. This is one I will definitely be watching again. If you have been a longtime subscriber and you find that you have the same taste as me, or at least close, definitely check out The Stranger. Just do me a favor and be patient with this one. But that is the list. Thanks again to Raycon for sponsoring another video. Go check out their link in the description below. But I will keep making these videos as long as you keep watching them. Thanks for checking out this special Netflix episode, and you will see me on the next one.